cash is going to evolve. So don't bother trying to guess every possible outcome and automate every possible outcome that may or may not exist. Oftentimes the best thing to do is create some degree of flexibility, so don't hard code everything into the system, but also make sure you have technology that is flexible and easy to adapt.
You can't get to the more bespoke and complex process automations and integrations until you really have that strong basis to build from, not just from a technical perspective, but also from an organization perspective. You need to show the value first in integrations and automation.
People immediately gravitate to, I want machine learning, I want the best analytics on the planet. Let's go and automate all the analytics. But oftentimes it's about, first you have to lay down the foundation. Get some of the basics right. Make sure your customer account is consistent across the board. Make sure your products are controlled and architected correctly. The basic data flows start. Once you have those, then you start getting fancier.
Documentation and business process mapping is so critical. It's the only right way to start these projects. Map your processes end to end, and it will be very clear on where those opportunities arise. If you know your processes in partnership with your business partners and you have them documented, it really makes the world a difference from a getting started perspective.
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. This podcast is inspired by the Wall Street Journal best-selling book with the same title, written by Workato CEO Vijay Tella. If you would like a free copy of the book, be sure to listen for a special offer at the end of today's episode. So for today's episode, what we're going to do is a process special. So I think it's the first time we're doing this. We did a industry special before, but today's a process special. We're going to go into order to cash. Order to cash is one of those processes that just happen a lot with Workato. We just released our latest automation index for 2024, and yet again, it's in the top 3 of all the processes. And for that, I have 2 experts here on the call with me. Jason Pikoos, managing partner for client experience at Connor Group, and Connor Group is working really with CFOs of growing companies, advising them. And we have together with Connor Group, Jason, what do we have? I think almost 50 or so clients where we've done order to cash together, quite a few. And then I also have with us Steve Attanasio. Steve is Senior Director for Finance and Business Systems at Data IQ. And he was prior at Latch and at WeWork, and you used Workato for order to cash at both Data IQ and Latch, right? And then you're also a Connor Group alum. So we really got the experts here together. So I'm excited about this one. Processes matter a lot for the new automation mindset, and order to cash is just one of the key processes. Some people call it the lifeblood of a company, definitely how a company makes money. So let's start. Maybe the best is to just understand order to cash really well. Jason, maybe you can help us. You want to start a definition of order to cash, or how you look at it?
No, absolutely. And by the way, fantastic to be here, Markus. Thank you for having us. Yeah, I think order to cash is a very common process, but I think oftentimes people oversimplify it. We actually even think about it going a little earlier as opportunity to cash. And it really starts with, a lead being generated, a customer account being set up. Then you create an opportunity, which typically adds some more details. That typically leads into a quote, which is a more formalized document that a customer lays out pricing and products to be acquired. That goes then further into now what you might think of as an order. And then that order splits into many, many kind of almost final destinations. The fulfillment for a customer of actually getting the product, whether that's a physical product or software, or even maybe it's some sort of usage. It's billing so that we actually can get the money. It's always helpful to get cash from a customer. Revenue recognition, which is obviously the gap in the accounting side of the house. And then there's a lot of analytics and reporting that comes from that. So it's a very large process, which, as you mentioned, Markus, is really the lifeblood of the organization. I don't know, Steve, what have you, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, Jason, I would echo your comments. We're seeing that data is going to be utilized all the way from the account setup through the opportunity creation, all the way to the end from a cash collection perspective. So we see in the field that we are obtaining and cleaning and reviewing data as early as account setup, all the way to the end of it makes its way on the invoice that we're having the expectation of being paid. So no, completely agree. It really has expanded from just an order document. It really is much further upstream, and when we seek to automate these processes and add automation to these processes.
And then the one thing with order to cash that's really interesting, it really shows what industry you're in, because it is different, right? Support or marketing might be more similar, but with order to cash, you really have to distinguish between, is it a B2C, a consumer-oriented business? Is it a B2B business? Is there software? Is there hardware involved? Steve, tell us a little bit, because, I think you've seen quite a bit, right? Data IQ is B2B software. Latch is consumer-oriented, right? And it actually includes hardware also. Like, how does the order to cash differ in these situations?
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you. From an order to cash perspective, you really need to understand what it is that you are selling, who you're selling to, where the actual fulfillment of the obligation needs to occur, whether it is a physical good, like in the case of the smart locks that we had at Latch, or whether it is automation nodes and instances and cloud-based or on-prem different or on-premises based softwares. It really is dependent on what is the business model, what are you selling, where are you delivering it to, and what are the constraints as it relates to making sure that those products are getting into the right hands timely. From a Latch perspective, we, as you kind of called out, it was a very complex order to cash process. We would quote hardware and software together when we spoke with different large property management companies or large buildings. We would give them the all-in cost. Here's what the hardware is going to cost you. Here's what the software is going to cost you. Additional bundles and features that we would quote separately, etc. But the actual fulfillment of those sales were actually very different. The true hardware would actually be sold to a third party, typically a smart lock integrator or installer, whereas the software would be sold to the building themselves. So that required very distinct splitting of the orders, as well as the additional complexity of making sure that the hardware would hit into our ERP, into our inventory management system, and we could fulfill it and ship it to the destination that it needed to get to, whether it was on site at a new building development, whether it was off site at a warehousing operation, or directly to a locksmith who would then take the components to the site to install. So there was a lot of complexity throughout our order to cash process based on kind of that business model and how we went to market.
So, I mean, you have the supply chain added. That's important. What else, Jason? What else have you guys seen? I mean, if you have we worked with one of the delivery services recently. The ticket item also matters, right? I mean, you do the accounting very, very different in your general ledger if you sell like $10 burger, or if you sell like $100,000 worth of B2B software. Maybe also, I don't know if you guys, Jason, if you've seen, because you work with software companies, biotechs quite a bit, services. If someone does just business services, then it's different yet again, right? What is the variety that you've seen?
There's obviously the direct to consumer, the services, the business to business. Is there a physical product? Is it all digital products? Is it sometimes a combination of both? Then you have usage-oriented businesses. So there's a lot of these variations. And what they do is they create changes and differences in your product architecture. So how you set up your product. What you'll find is B2B businesses, the products tend to be what you might think of as much more customizable, because oftentimes the customer wants to negotiate how they architect, how they get charged, how they use the product. Whereas a direct-to-consumer business, given the fact that you're interacting with an enormous array of customers, you're typically having much more homogeneous, a much more narrow band of products. When you're dealing with hardware, Steve mentioned there's a whole supply chain component to it. So you have to deal with supply chain and inventory systems. With direct-to-consumer businesses, again, you're dealing with credit card providers, payment providers, app stores, marketplaces, and then obviously dealing with the enormous volumes of data. You're typically inserting data warehouse technology into the mix. With B2B, you typically have your typical CRM product, such as Salesforce, which is acting as your, the starting point of your lead generation process. It tends to be much more bespoke. It requires much more hands-on engagement. And the reality is with B2B businesses, whether hardware or software and the like, you also have a commission process. And that becomes a really, really important part of, okay, how do I capture this deal so that everybody involved gets credit? So there's a lot of nuances from how you architect your customer to how you define your product to the data flows to the various systems involved. And therefore that architecture and those, call it systems involved in that flow, really, really change how you automate it. It's really fun when you have direct-to-consumer, B2B, hardware, software all combined, which is not actually that uncommon.
Interesting. And then, so Jason, you mentioned the beginning, right? So you expanded order to cash to opportunity to cash, which kind of makes sense, right? Steve, you want to talk about the tail end? Because I think you could probably expand there too, right? I know at least, at Workado 2023, everyone talks about, churn and these kind of things, probably data IQ. You have similar things. Is it opportunity to renewal? Is that kind of what you're looking at? I mean, Jason talked about the commissioning. What happens at the tail end? Maybe even like automatic activation of the software itself? Like what pieces are at the tail end?
Yeah, it's common, not just at Data IQ, but at Latch and at many of the clients and customers I served at Connor Group as well. We talk about order to cash and a lot of folks think, the process is completed once the cash has come in. But really, this is a never ending cycle, especially when you're on a subscription based business. Not only do you have renewal, but sometimes you even have an expectation of potential upsells. You sell, you have a renewal in a year, but you're hoping that based on customer usage that you may not be seeing, you can expect to see, a phone call or an email in your inbox asking for, more user licenses, more nodes, more locks, more properties. So it really is a very fluid and ever evolving process, especially when working at dynamic companies that I have in the past, where the product roadmap is ever changing and ever developing. Whether it's the additions of, as Jason highlighted earlier, usage-based SKUs, new options and potentials for services-based SKUs, wherein we are going to hold your hand while you're implementing the software. We're doing the implementation on your behalf. So this is an ever-changing landscape, not just from the life cycle of a deal, but throughout order to cash. As Jason mentioned earlier, Salesforce is typically, the best in class in what we see commonly in the field. And that is a tool that is not just for the generation of leads, orders, and getting to the point of cash. It is also a tool for CSMs that are actively working on accounts to make sure that the health score of those accounts are in good standing, leading to a potential upsell arrangement or a positive renewal at the very least. We see a lot of automation opportunities within the life cycle of order to cash, not just solely based on the generation of a quote, the generation of an order, passing that into a NetSuite or other ERP and automating invoicing and tax calculation and revenue recognition and all those good things. There's a lot of ancillary processes that live within that system that are ripe for automation as well.
Yeah, maybe if I'll just add one thought there, Markus. I mean, what Steve described when we talk about order to cash, it almost describes a linear process. It starts and it terminates. What Steve really spoke about, which is and really well put, is it's actually a much more circular process. It has many, many endpoints, but those endpoints actually oftentimes feed earlier, and therefore it's cyclical in its nature. Many of those endpoints feed information back. A CSM cannot operate effectively if they don't know, what did we bill the customer? What products the customer's got? Have we fulfilled the order? Many of these data points are absolutely necessary, especially in everybody kind of moving to the SaaS world, that subscription, that recurring customer structure. And therefore, order to cash is almost order to cash to order to cash on an ongoing basis. because that's kind of really the nature of an effective recurring business.
Yeah, I'll just add on that, and I'll tell maybe an interesting anecdote. When we started first building our integrations at Latch, partnering with the Connor Group who assisted with the implementation and all the different recipes that we're utilizing with Workato, we got through our phase one very successfully. The first phase really focused on moving that order from Salesforce into NetSuite and splitting that order between our hardware and our software, and automating the back end as it related to supply chain, making sure it hit the warehouse on time, making sure the actual physical products ended up at the site on time and got activated on time. And it was a huge success. It was a huge leap forward for the company. It was a great automation story, and a story I'm very, very proud of. But what happened after that phase one of integrations, which is even more interesting, we started to get into even more bespoke avenues of automation, because the company now understood from a mindset perspective what was possible from an automation perspective. So what we got into in particular, which I'm very interested in, was highlighting is, our executive team brought to me and the rest of the finance team that they were having issues as it related to RMA devices. So these are devices on apartment doors that through either a poor implementation or misuse, that the devices were now defective and they were unable to be operating effectively. And basically what was happening was it was taking us a very long time for us to field the call from the field through the CSM function that the device was inoperable and that we needed to send a backup replacement device. And we took a look at the process and we understood that one of the pieces that we understood, which was very poor, was that the CSMs, when they received that call that the lock was broken on the person's door, and they had that as an open issue, they had to input the same information in 3 different systems. They had to put a case down in Salesforce. They had to enter a case into Zendesk. They had to file a JIRA ticket, which had to get reviewed. And then that JIRA ticket would get manually picked up and create an RMA in NetSuite, triggering the replacement device going out. What we did was we had one centralized spot where they logged the RMA in Salesforce, and the data flowed to all the ancillary systems, so everyone had what they needed. We shortened the timeline for a customer to get a new lock on their door from about a month to about a week, depending on average where they were sitting and if we had stock available to be shipped. But that was only possible after going through our first phase of order to cash, and then having the organization bring to us automation opportunities out of need to service our customers.
And just to add there, so RMA, I guess, is return merchandise authorization, right? So again, I mean, for people who do software, it's for hardware. It's for hardware things going on, like when components are defect and so on. It's really interesting. I mean, I don't know about the audience here online. They're probably the head is exploding with all the complexity of an order to cash. It's not linear. There's kind of loops in there. I mean, it starts earlier, it ends later. It can have all these flavors. Steve, kind of from your experience, how do you start? If you gave advice after having done this a couple of times, where what are the steps? You mentioned like kind of start with the basics, but what is phase 1, 2, 3, and if you had to do it now another time, like how would you go about it?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great question. I think there's a few, I would say, high level principles that I would say that kind of guide me in these projects. One is I always build from the back to the front. So when I'm integrating, let's say Salesforce with NetSuite, I'm really starting from the back end of my NetSuite. And sometimes I'm even going further than NetSuite. I'm going to actually our data warehouse, let's say in a Snowflake or equivalent. I'm really taking what are my requirements from a data perspective at the end of this journey, or at the end of a linear or repeating journey. But at the end of this journey, what do I need? What do I need to bill? What do I need for revenue recognition? What do I need from an analytics perspective, from a measurement perspective? What am I measuring about my sales cycle that's important? My KPIs, my usage-based metrics, whether it's my TCVs or my NARs, whatever it is. I need to know everything I need to capture at the end, and I build backwards from there. I do focus as well on some key principles. One is really understanding your order to cash process, and if you're not going to understand it the best you can at the company, you need to partner very closely with those folks that do understand it very, very closely. I do recommend putting together documentation. Documentation typically in flowchart form is usually what I find to be very effective. Mapping out the current state. Where are the process gaps? Where are my manual steps or manual pieces that are splitting off into other areas? Who is performing what? What data is being captured when? Those are some of the key principles really that I kind of evaluate as I'm kind of seeking to automate these processes. But Jason, I know you probably have some feedback on that as well.
Yeah, it's Steve, it's something that you even pointed out as we were kind of just chatting about this topic. I mean, the reality is people immediately gravitate to, oh, I want machine learning. I want the best analytics on the planet. Let's go and automate all the analytics. But oftentimes it's about first you have to lay down the foundation, which you even kind of walk through. Hey, let's build a simple, take the quote from Salesforce and move it into NetSuite. Get some of the basics right. Make sure your customer account is consistent across the board. Make sure your products are controlled and architected correctly. The basic data flows start. Once you have those, then you start getting fancier, such as that RMA automation that you described, which is a much more sophisticated process, right? Really embed that process automation. And then once you've laid the foundation, built kind of your first couple of stories, then you can get to the fancy spot and start thinking about what are all these amazing analytics I can do. Frankly, hopefully even progressing down to what we sometimes refer to as the predictive phase of an automation, especially in order to cash, where you use machine learning to guide your process. So it's not only the CSMs determining when I can upsell or downsell or avoid churn, but actually you have powerful data that can actually kind of trigger it for you. But really start with the basics. You have to have a solid foundation. You have to have good process. You have to have basic transactions. Once you have those, you can then start adding those layers of sophistication to really get to that really exciting data analytics oriented process.
Just one quick thing. I wanted to echo what you said before, which I thought was actually pretty insightful. And I think this is actually true pretty much for every process, I would say, where you say like, hey, start with the end and work yourself backwards, right? I mean, in product management, people talk about outside in, but this is kind of similar. You start with the result and move backwards, which is counterintuitive, because I think when people think of a process, they would always start with the beginning, right? And then go to the end, and then they go like, oops, something was missing, and then they have to iterate. So starting with the back is actually for every process probably a really good thing. But sorry, I interrupted you. You had something else you wanted to add.
No, I think very much in my career, I think one of the things I've learned very well is when working on these type of projects, you really want to crawl before you walk, and then you run. And really that really is critically important. Like starting with the basics, building a strong foundation for which you can further build upon. You can't get to the more bespoke and complex process automations and integrations until you really have that strong basis to build from, not just from a technical perspective, but also from an organization perspective. You need to show the value first in integrations and automations. You need to show what you can do, and then you can start to get internally generated automation requests, which are my favorite requests to receive. The business coming to us and partnering with us to seeking to address a problem, as whether it be with machine learning opportunities, or even some of the more bespoke and interesting generative AI opportunities. Like, you really need to start with the basics, and then you can build upon that.
So Jason, tell us a little bit, because you wrote this article, which I thought was awesome, where you introduced these maturity levels of order to cash. I think it has a little bit to do with what we just talked about, right? Start with the basics. But how did you describe to us what you see as kind of like where you start at the basics, at maybe maturity 1 or so, and then how you work yourself upwards to higher maturity levels? How would that look like?
No, it's great. And thank you for it. Was an article we wrote a little while back with you guys with Workato. We start and we define the level one as transactional, which is just, hey, taking data from point A to point B. It's not very sophisticated. It's not very complex, super value add, because it does what Steve described earlier in some of the example of just eliminating a lot of the double manual entry. It reduces errors enormously, because as soon as a human is involved in a process, unfortunately, error rates typically tend to rise. So it can be really an efficiency driver. Once you've done those, on the other hand, which is unfortunate, many people tend to kind of recognize they've got to this transactional automation, and they just stop, and which is really unfortunate, because there's so much more you can do. Once you've achieved transactional automation, you really want to look at process automation. And that's really what Steve had described before. We start seeing real value. When you take a step back and you ask, how can I use automation to really automate and orchestrate the entire process? Not just taking data from point A to point B, but applying logic on that data, triggering various different workflows, various different processes, engaging various different users, even dealing with exceptions is a big part of process automation. That kind of gets you that second tier. You're getting major value right now. Now these processes are not only much more efficient, but they're much more scalable. They're much more able to adapt to how your business truly operates day in and day out. The last stage of automation, which is the really exciting one, and we're really hoping to see more and more people embark upon this journey, but unfortunately not many people do, is when we refer to as predictive. That's when you've done the transactions, you've automated your process is generating enormous amounts of highly valuable data, and now you're using that data to really proactively manage your business. So you're getting powerful analytics, machine learning. Ideally, those things are proactive in engaging your users. The problem with most dashboard-oriented analytics is a human still has to go and look at it, analyze it, evaluate what to do, and then drive actions. Where with good machine learning and proactive automation, the systems, the technology is not only determining the metric, it's oftentimes maybe looking at multiple metrics concurrent with each other, and then taking those proactive steps to drive actions, such as, hey, here's a cross-sell or an upsell opportunity, or here's a customer at risk of churning, or here's a customer at risk of non-payment, or here's a customer we shouldn't sell to, by the way, because they haven't paid. Those are the type of behaviors that are less about efficiency in the process, although they certainly can, but really can actually materially impact top-line growth. And that's the real value. But as Steve said, to get to that, you start at a transaction, then you automate process, and then you get to that predictive. And that's the journey that people have to go on. You try to go to predictive when you don't have the transactional, garbage in, garbage out. Your metrics will be, unfortunately, worth less than the paper or the dashboards they're written on.
No, makes total sense. But I do want to ask both of you guys about the exception handling. So if we're going, like, I would say, like, not predictive, but kind of like somewhere in the middle of the maturity model, I could even extend your maturity model a little downwards, because if I come from, and you guys are both functional experts, right? You know finance, you know these systems really well. I meet IT people who look at order to cash as a pure, database to database movement exercise. And back in the days, like years back today, I think we go order by order, almost like real time when a new order comes in. But if you go 1-2 decades back, people would say like, hey, once at midnight, like take all my orders that came in during that day and move them over to my other system. Hey, we're done. Which obviously at that point, it's really, really hard to even get to that process understanding, right? Because if you have them in bulk, it's now harder to actually go through all the rules, much harder than if you do it one by one. But talk to me about this exception handling, because just in general, I mean, independent of order to cash in any process, typically people would say like, okay, we got maybe the happy path covered. When everything's okay, no exceptions, nothing out of the ordinary, it flows through, and it's maybe straight through processing. But I think you're reaching another level of maturity when you deal with the things that's beside the happy path, with the exceptions, where when maybe there's some kind of weird orders or different orders or large orders or small orders, and then it maybe sounds counterintuitive, but maybe the best automation would be to actually flag those exceptions to a person instead of actually once you process them straight through, you create more garbage at the back end, because now to deal with all the exceptions later it's actually harder. How do you guys think about this, the exception handling? Do you have any principles, any strategies how people can systematically deal with these exceptions? Anything you learned?
Yeah, I can take it to start. I mean, I think especially within the realm of order to cash in particular, exceptions are not necessarily the worst thing in the world. In the past, I've used the term in multiple customers, clients, companies I've worked for, standard deal versus non-standard deal. And that really is the way that you can kind of measure the size of the prize. So, your standard deal, it's probably 80% of your volume. And your non-standard deals might be 20% of your volume, but your non-standard deals might drive 50 or 60% of your revenue. And those are the deals that need to be evaluated for revenue recognition. That's where people need to take a fine-tooth comb through the MLA that was on the customer's paper rather than on our paper, or the order document that was on the customer's paper versus our paper, which is very difficult to automate because the data is not being generated natively within Salesforce in those instances. And really, for us, I think the way I look at it is really, how do we build the controls around those non-standard deals, flag them to the right people with the technology available to us so that they are reviewed appropriately, so that we're not putting garbage into the system. We're not polluting the 80% of the deals that we have very high levels of automation, very little need for humans to be stopping and reviewing and approving over and over again. So I definitely see exception handling as really crafting a policy in conjunction with the partners in my revenue operations team or my rev accounting team or my finance team, really to say, these are how we're going to handle these deals that are not easily able to be automated. But I guess Jason, do you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I think you think of it as you typically have your happy path, your standard process. There are oftentimes also expected exceptions, which is kind of it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but those exist, meaning those are normal types of variations that we see. They're not our standard, but hey, we typically charge customers and expect 30-day payment terms, but we might go up to 90, and that's okay. We typically architect a product this way and we bill quarterly, but we will allow annual. We typically allow for a 30-day return period, but maybe we extend it to 60, whatever those might be. So those are what you might call expected exceptions. So you can have your happy path, you have your expected exceptions path, which might require some diligence, but less heavy diligence on them. And then there's the very non-standard. And that's where you typically do want, as Markus, you mentioned, a human involved in those. I think it's important not to try and over-automate as well. At some point in time, there's a diminishing return. It doesn't mean that you don't automate as much as you can of the process, but there is a point in time where efficiency is gained by actually saying, hey, if we build a piece of technology that can deal with this thing that occurs one in every 1,000 contracts, it's just not worth the time. Let's let a human be involved. Now, I will say a lot of the call it non-standards that we deal with today are typically because they're unstructured. In other words, they're outside of our system, the order that you gave. What I am excited about is the generative AI capabilities that are coming to bear, where historically that would have been a real pain. How do we do with this human intervention, trying to read this and compare and contrast? I think with generative AI, we're going to see a next layer of what we would have thought of as non-standard, entirely non-automatable, if that's a word. But with generative AI tied in with some of the other technologies, we probably will be able to automate more. That being said, there are certain things that you just need a human to look at. Dot the I, cross the T, finish the process. So,
yeah, it's interesting because we see generative AI, for example. It's obviously great with text information, where if let's say the legal contract or the legal language of a certain order is different, out of the ordinary, I think generative AI can detect that and basically say like, oh, well, this doesn't look like a standard one, so let's treat it differently. Which probably with traditional rules and so on would be much harder to deal with. Anything else that I mean, this is really interesting because what you're saying is the more complex exceptions we can probably, maybe we'll get to with generative AI to handle them in a better way, where the traditional automation technology that's for the high volume, very standard, lower complexity things, but now we got a new tool for the other ones as well.
Yeah, I mean, what the examples that you might see here are not only can AI detect a contract to determine it's non-standard, it could probably tell you, or it can tell you what is non-standard. And it can take that data and then ingest it back into the system so that things flow correctly. Right now, what would happen typically is non-standard contract, that's flagged in the system. Somebody in finance, accounting, billing, collections, fulfillment has to review that, figure out what they need to do about it, and then act. With generative AI, you could extract that information. And again, now that you have structured data from unstructured data, you can automate it. So, hey, we need to fulfill to this destination. We need to fulfill in this way. Tell the fulfillment team. Billing terms are unusual. These are what they are. Tell the billing team, or capture that information in NetSuite so billing is correct. We have acceptance terms. We have return or rights of return provisions. Let the RevRec team know, and therefore we trigger RevRec correctly. So it actually is adding a whole layer of automation that frankly were not thought of before, because as soon as it went non-standard, yep, human, you need to look at it. And then, by the way, make many human handoffs at that stage. So it'll be a really interesting one. There still will be a lot of those very complex deals that are just, especially for B2B businesses where, and Markus, you've probably experienced this at Workato, where the architecture of the deal is just something really innovative that we thank our sales team for coming up and really thinking outside of the box. And those will require human, but there are aspects of it where I think we'll see much more automation, where in the past it was just frankly not feasible.
Let's talk about, one thing that I heard a lot about was, you got the process, but then you also got the underlying data architecture. That's got to be right. You talked about structured data, and now with generative AI, also unstructured data. How do you guys think of the data architecture for order to cash? Maybe Steve, what have you learned? What your different implementations you've done? Any advice for the audience here?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did read the book, and in the book, it referenced unfragility, which I really liked as a term. I think before I read the book, I had a different term for it, which was flexibility. I want to build system architectures that are flexible to grow and scale as the company does, that can adapt to different product offerings with different, billing terms. We talked a little bit about usage-based billing, something that's, very, very common in the industry and getting more common. So when I think of data structure, especially as it relates to order to cash, my head immediately goes to building the right data dimensions that meet the needs of all of the different customers within the order to cash cycle, whether that's revenue, our revenue organizations, or our account executives, our CSMs, our revenue operators, all those folks, our marketing personnel, but also our finance personnel, our accounting personnel, our data scientists, our analytics department. So when I think of that, I go back to flexibility in the data architecture, making sure that, as we add the dimensions, we give ourselves room for new dimensions, new product offerings, et cetera. But Jason, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Maybe just a few thoughts. One is as a general rule, capture the data where it originates. And I know that sounds very obvious, but oftentimes doesn't occur. Most of the data, for example, we did the math the one time, 80% of data required for revenue recognition is generated during the sales cycle. But much of it is not captured systematically in a structured fashion. So once you coming back to, hey, design from the end backwards, but also create the process to capture it when it is actually being originated. So when you're talking to your customer about billing structures or weird terms and conditions, capture the data right there and then. Don't leave it open for later. The other thing about data architecture, there can only be one source of truth. There cannot be multiple sources of truth. So you have to go and ask yourself, which system owns the account or the customer record? Which system owns the product record? And you then need to architect controls around that. If the product lives in NetSuite and the customer lives in Salesforce, you can't go edit the product in Salesforce and the customer in NetSuite, because otherwise you create multiple sources of truth and things tend to break very quickly. So those are just a few ideas around data. I mean, you really have to think through. It's not just about what data do I need, but where should I capture it? Who is the owner of the data? So some of that governance around it, and then embed controls, which are not necessarily so-called true automation per se, but controls and governance to make sure that you instill good structure, good behaviors, so that it's not the garbage in, garbage out is avoided.
Yeah, one point to add to that, I mean, Jason, especially from an architecture perspective, not just the source of truth, but making sure that at that point of source and truth, you have all the data that you're going to need. So, sometimes it could be as simple as, breaking the way we capture address information in Salesforce from the standard fields that are offered on an account object or an opportunity object, and breaking them into new objects that actually fit very nicely for integration in NetSuite. Very, very common. We've done it every single time. Capturing the product information on the front end of Salesforce so that it can feed into where do you want the revenue to hit for this particular product? What type of product is it? What is the revenue recognition? These are things we embed upstream so it can be carried over the integration, create the record seamlessly into NetSuite with an eye towards the controls living in the appropriate source of truth as well. So just a little more functional on that point.
See, this is interesting with the Gen AI. Also, I believe there's actually a lot of opportunity for automatic data capture. I think we're seeing this, in recordings of sales calls. What information can you pull from there without asking, an account executive to actually input it somewhere? Can you maybe think about these things like really early on and almost like populate the order before it actually is an order, auto populate. So I think that's interesting also. The one thing that you guys talked about a lot was laying the foundation, but then being flexible and evolving it. So I'm actually curious about this process, how this works, because it seems to me like an order to cash process is almost never finished. It's like a living thing almost, and it can always get better. There's probably curveballs that hit it, new pricing models or new product features that get priced differently or whatever it might be. That how do you think about that agility in the process and that collaboration that brings you forward? Any lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. The first time we built our integrations at Latch, we did it not with Workato and not with Connor Group's help, and none of it worked. It was extremely brittle. It only worked on the happy path on like Mondays and Tuesdays, but took Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays off. It was extremely brittle. We thought it would work. It was built by our engineering team, and it really just didn't. It really didn't, because it was so brittle and it was so specific to the rules, and there was many other issues with it. But and from that moment, I really took to heart very seriously that what we build in phase one is going to evolve and change over the course of the next phase or over the years as things changed within our business and we added product offerings, new billing options, etc. So I look back at the integrations that we went live at Latch were almost completely different within 18 months, maybe even within 12 months. We added further error handling recipes. We consolidated some of our task usage. We really learned that we could obtain some of the information further upstream, so we could kind of centralize the data on one object and didn't need to pull it from quite so many. So To your point, Marcus, it does feel like the order to cash automation journey is never done, because it really never is done. Your business, typically the businesses I've worked with, are continuing to grow and scale and have new product offerings and new and exciting and innovative ways to sell our products. So, that really just goes back to, it's never over, and build it flexible so it's not going to break at the first opportunity for change or something new that's being thrown at you.
What I might say is, which is spot on, order to cash is going to evolve. So don't bother trying to guess every possible outcome and automate every possible outcome that may or may not exist. Oftentimes the best thing to do is, as Steve actually gave a few examples of, create some degree of flexibility. So don't hard code everything into the system, but also make sure you have technology that is flexible and easy to adapt. Not to do a sales pitch here for Workato, but it's a reason why we've always enjoyed the product, because it is a very easy product to evolve. It's not a heavy amount of coding and 3,000 lines of code that if I need to change it, I need to go through a whole crazy change management and a recode and the like, but products like Salesforce and NetSuite and many of these cloud applications are very, very dynamic. If you use them to their full extent, they natively give you flexibility, not necessarily out of the gate and you build these perfectly flexible, but as things evolve, it's very quickly, I need a new field, I need a new product, I need a new customer type, I need a new RevRec schedule, I need a new integration, a new data flow. All of those things are really easy when you have the right type of technology. On the other hand, if you decide you're going to, custom code your own integrations, enjoy. They will work on Mondays, Tuesdays, and take Wednesdays off, and potentially not on Thursdays and Fridays. And you will get what you get, right? So I think a key component of flexibility is not only how you architect your process, but get technology that can be flexible as well.
Yeah, it seems to me like the exactly wrong approach to order to cash probably is like the waterfall, where someone designs it and then hands it over to someone to build, because that's just one iteration. It's going to go back. You probably also need a platform that both technical and non-technical people can rally around if they want to evolve it and want to be agile with it and want to change it and modify it and so on. So all of these things do really matter. Listen, this was fascinating. I mean, I hope people are not getting desperate about all the complexity and all the change and all, everything they didn't think they had to deal with in terms of order to cash. But it is an important process. It's one that requires craft to get right and then evolve well over time. Just curious, before we finish this up here, any last thought that you guys have? Any advice to the audience? Maybe there's something where you would say never ever do this, or you say well, you should really think about this. You didn't think about this, or I don't know. Maybe you think about just the excitement about Gen AI. Any kind of last advice to the audience here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably show my Connor Group, Connor Group credentials by saying it, but documentation and business process mapping is so critical. It's the only way, I think, the only right way to start these projects. Map your processes end to end that you're seeking to automate, and it will be very clear on where those opportunities arise. Really, future state and present state and future state process flows are worth their weight in gold when done appropriately, and the use cases will become very apparent. I think that's one of the things that with order cache in particular can be very scary to get started, as we talked about. But really, if you know your processes in partnership with your business partners, and you have them documented, it really makes the world a difference from a getting started perspective.
Might I add to that? I think it was a comment that Steve mentioned earlier. One, I would design your process from the back, the end to the beginning, because you need so much more data as you progress, but so much of that data is originated at the beginning. So you really make sure that you start at the end and work your way backwards and just be incremental. Marcus, you were spot on. don't over-engineer this. Don't try think of everything. Start small, make steps, show value. I promise, once you start showing value, people will knock down your door to get more automation. Add maturity, grow into that amazing machine learning analytics. Don't try jump the gun, because unfortunately that we see people try to do it over and over and over again. They're always very confident that they can succeed, and just unfortunately I've never seen it happen.
Oh, fascinating. I mean, it seems so, if I just draw a conclusion here, it seems to me like what you really need is that awareness that, that is actually a big deal, the order to cash process. There can be a lot of complexities, and it is not a linear thing. There can be loops in it. It touches a lot of different business systems, maybe earlier than you think, and maybe further than you think. But once you have that awareness and you start small and understand it's a journey, you're probably going to make good progress in the right direction. So fascinating. Look, listen, Jason, Steve, really want to say thank you for being here with us for this episode, and I hope the audience learned a lot more about order to cash than they ever knew. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, thanks, Markus.
Thank you very much for having me. Very, very happy to have joined.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you like what you heard, we do have a special offer for you. If you share this or any other episode of the podcast on LinkedIn with the hashtag TNAM for the new automation mindset, that's TNAM, our team will reach out to you and make sure you get a free hardcover copy of the book by our Workato CEO, Vijay Tella. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.